Have you ever felt like your podcast is just floating around without direction? Or maybe you're wondering how to turn those downloads into actual leads for your business? Today, I'm going to share with you how to set podcast goals that will take your show to the next level. Welcome back. I'm Chapman, where we talk about all things podcasting. I help female entrepreneurs launch, monetize, and grow their podcast. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more tips and strategies. Okay, when it comes to your podcast, setting clear and achievable goals is crucial for anyone that wants to use their podcast to grow their business and generate leads. But before we dive into the goals, let's talk about something that's even more important than that, which is the purpose of your podcast, why you started, where you're going with it, and then that will help us set our goals. So before you set your goals, you have to have a purpose. Why do you have a podcast? Understanding your purpose gives you clarity on what your podcast is doing for you, whether it's getting people into your course, building your email list, turning cold leads into warm leads, or whatever your purpose was for starting your podcast. You really need to have what I like to call a listener journey. So if I were to land on your podcast today, what is the journey you want me to take? You want me to listen to your podcast, and then what? Am I joining your email list so you can nurture those warm leads? Or am I diving into a course? Am I just subscribing and liking to your podcast? What is a journey from the time I start listening to your podcast to when I get to the end of it that you want me to go on? And then that will help you set your goals. Okay, I'd love to hear what drives your podcast, what your goals are for it, and what the purpose is. So drop it below and let me know. Okay, number 2, why do you need goals for your podcast? Goals give you direction, they help keep you focused, they help you measure progress, and they keep you motivated. So they ensure you know exactly what your podcast is doing for you. So, like I said before, is the goal of your podcast to get somebody onto your email list? So my client Haley recently sent me a message. She has a wine podcast called The Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine. So go check her out. I'll link it below. But she was hosting a wine retreat recently, and one of the women that joined the wine retreat had found Haley's podcast and joined her Cork Crew membership and then signed up for her retreat. So that to us is exactly what we want to see on her listeners' journey. They found her podcast, they joined her membership, and then they signed up for a retreat. So we know that her podcast is converting leads into paying customers. And you'll see none of that has to do with a download number. But that was a massive win for her because, as we said, her funnel is the podcast, her core crew membership, and then into her retreat. So when you're thinking about your podcast goals, you really do need to go beyond the number. It's exciting to see lots of downloads, but if you have lots of downloads and they're not converting, then what is your podcast doing for you? Okay, next let's talk about SMART goals. So as most of us know, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So for example, instead of saying, I want more listeners, which is very broad, we say, I want to increase my average downloads by 20% in the next 3 months. Or I want to convert 10% of my listeners into leads in the next quarter. See the difference between just saying, I want more listeners, and then I want to increase my downloads by a certain percentage. That's a measurable goal than just saying, I want more listeners. So when it comes to our goals, there are several ways to set goals for your podcast. So here's some key goals you should consider setting for your podcast. Having a download goal is always great. However, as we've talked about, we don't just want to base everything around your download goal. The next is your engagement goal. How many ratings and reviews are you getting? Are you getting DMs on social media, asking questions, talking about your podcast? Are they engaging on your posts in social media? Or when you send out an email, are you getting replies to your email? So those would be something like an engagement goal. And then we have our conversion goal, which is how many listeners are you turning into leads? Because our podcast is great, but if it's not converting into paying clients, then that's an issue. And then we have our conversion goals. How many listeners are you turning into leads? So most of our goals with a podcast is for somebody to find us on our podcast where we nurture them and then we funnel them down into paid courses or memberships or coaching sessions. The next is a growth goal. how many subscribers and followers are you aiming for? And then what you can do is go into Apple Podcast Connect and you can see followers gained and lost. So this is a nice number to watch either month over month or every few months to make sure, because you're always going to lose listeners just like on social media. But the amount of listeners you lose and the amount of listeners you gain, obviously we want the amount of listeners we're gaining to be much higher than the amount of listeners we're losing. So next, how do we achieve our goals? So in our SMART goals, one of our steps was achievable. So how are we going to achieve those goals? To achieve these goals, we're going to break them down into actionable steps. So for instance, if your goal is to increase your downloads, you're going to focus on improving your marketing or marketing more. Sometimes I see podcasters only share their episode one time. As we know, people need to see things from us multiple times before they really engage or even remember. We have a lot of things on our mind. So if you've only shared your new episode one time, chances are pretty good that people are going to forget. So you want to remind them often. Collaborating with other podcasters, having them on your podcast, you going on their podcast, and then you can enhance your content. So lots of options when you're setting those achievable goals. Another thing you really want to watch are your analytics. So monthly, I will look at my clients' downloads to make sure that we are growing month over month. And then every other month, I will do an in-depth analysis of their podcast because we want to make sure we're growing. And if we're only looking at a download number, sometimes it can seem a bit low, but when you're looking at an overall picture, things can look a lot different. I recently was looking at a client, and because it's summer, people are busy, so it seemed like her numbers were down for the month of July because I just did this. But when I looked at Q1 downloads versus Q2 downloads, they were up significantly. So maybe while it felt like looking at that one number that her podcast was not growing over the summer, it actually was growing quite a bit. So like we said, when you're looking at analytics, there's a host of analytics you can look at. I'm going to drop the link below. I have a free guide on what analytics you want to watch when it comes to your podcast. But audience engagement, the number of subscribers, shares, followers gained and lost, all of those numbers give you a much better picture than just looking at your download number. Okay, there you have it. That's how we're going to set podcast goals. Remember, setting and achieving these goals is quite the journey. So you have to be patient and persistent. It's very easy to launch a podcast and have all that excitement in the very beginning and then to see download numbers drop off and then to feel a little let down. But it's like that snowball effect that I talk to my clients about. It takes a while, but it's like a snowball and it's just growing and growing and growing. And then before you know it, boom, you have so many downloads, you have people engaging with you, you're rolling people into your programs and your coaching services, and it's so exciting. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment below with your podcast goals. I'd love to hear them. I really, really would. Also, don't forget to download my Master Your Podcast Analytics Guide from the link in the description to help you track and achieve your podcast goals effectively. Thanks for watching and happy podcasting.